Advisor on Youth and Gender to the DG of WHO, Ms. Saminarsih. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Kusuma, for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed your dinner, and we would like to commence with our dinner dialogue for tonight. I promise you it will not be boring, because we have...
still continue the coffee.
Yes. Dessert, I will not get between you and your dessert and coffee and tea, but we will continue the dialogue with very interesting panelists, all experts in their field. I would like to call to the stage my colleague from WHO Geneva, Tereza Kasaeva, Director of Global TB Program. Please come to the panelist table. Lucica Ditiu, Executive Director of Stop TB Partnership Global.
Yes.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. Adrian Thomas, Vice President of Global Market Access from Johnson & Johnson. Peter Sands, Executive Director of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB and Malaria.
Yeah, we try to do a gender.
And Kitty van Weezenbeek, Executive Director of KNCV Tuberculosis Foundation. Please.
I'm next to you. We did girl, boy, girl, boy. Oh. Girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, girl.
By the way, we can claim that this is a gender parity panel.
Yes.
Dear panelists, I would like to start this dinner dialogue by inviting you all to answer a bit of one question each. Kindly spend 5 minutes when you give the context and the answer of this question. It will not be difficult. You are very, very expert in your field, and this will refer to what we are doing this week in the UNGA. First, I would like to begin with Tereza. Tereza, this is a big week for you, with the TB as the high-level, as the main agenda of the high-level meeting in the UNGA. I understand that WHO has just launched the TB report, the global report, and then this morning there was the side event on children and adolescent TB, where you launched the roadmap of ending TB for children and adolescents. Would you care to elaborate on that and set the context of our dialogue this evening, please?
Thank you very much, dear honorable hostess and guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure, and I'm proud to be here among such a distinguished participants of this dinner meeting. And we, of course, all of us, I mean, OTB community, not only WHO, are very excited a few days before first ever high-level meeting on ending TB in UN. It's a historical chance, unique opportunity, and maybe it's our last hope to attract attention to this problem, which lasts for many, there are different sources for 1,000 years, for 100 years, but it's a long-lasting problem, and it should be ended as soon as possible, because the numbers of people which are facing with this disease and dying of this disease is horrible. And if we'll turn our view to our global TB report, which we launched on 18th of September in advance of high-level meeting to attract more attention to the problem. You will see that tuberculosis is #1 infectious disease killer in the world, with more than 1.6 million deaths annually, including 300,000 deaths of people living with HIV. And it's really big number. Incidents are decreasing, but very slowly. This last year, 2017, it was more than 10 million incidents globally, and only 6.4 million were notified. It means that we have a huge gap. 3.6 million people are either not detected, not reported, or simply not informed and aware about the problem. And we should keep it in our mind, and we as WHO are paying a lot of attention to this gap, try to come out with a new vision and new initiative, which was launched by Director General Dr. Tedros in the World Health Assembly. First it was announced, presented during the Indian NTB Summit. It's joint initiative Find, Treat, All, with the Stop TB Partnership and Global Fund and all the partners. It's open initiative, and we're expecting engagement of all the member states, especially high burden countries, and it's aimed to provide to find and treat for 5 years at least 40 million people with TB. It's really very ambitious but realistic target, concrete target, and we would like to attract attention and to encourage heads of states, ministers of health, all the officials, to come out with a strong commitments and with their own targets within this global target. And it will, we are sure that it will push and activate a lot all the processes. Another target, according to the burden of TB, global burden, is focused on preventive treatment and providing preventive services for all, people with latent TB infection. And I would like to remind you that, again, according to the report, it's about quarter of the population of the world is infected. And it means that 1.7 billion of people are potentially in risk of development of this disease. And so that's why we should be very strongly focused on preventive activities, and 30 million people, at least 30 million people for 5 years should be provided by this preventive treatment. And we should especially remind on this case about the most vulnerable category. It's children under 5 years old, from the household contacts, people living with HIV. As Diah mentioned, today we presented, we launched our second edition of roadmap on ending TB in children and adolescents. And really it's impossible, it's an amazing situation when children, our future, we dedicate our life to them. We spend a lot of time to educate them, to grow, that they are dying today in the 21st century from TB. More than 1 million people, children, annually fell ill with TB, and about 233,000 die from TB. It means that every single day, more than 640 children die from TB. And it's our responsibility as adults to provide all necessary access to the treatment. And when we are talking about those who died, we should also keep in our mind that 96%, mostly all of them, died without any access to the treatment, and 80% of these children were under 5 years. It's our fault, it's our responsibility, and we should not leave the situation as it is now. Another problem, ongoing crisis of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. About 500,000 people. This number is more or less the same for several years. There is no progress in decreasing. It's like a bomb which keeping the burden and reminding us about the threat. The threat is growing. TB becoming more stronger for the last century. And this amount of people, number of people, more than half a million people, are absolutely special category with a very low treatment success rate. It's about 55% only. If we compare with the all the treatment success rate, it's about 82%. It's too low. And what are the reasons of such a low treatment success? There are numerous reasons. And first of all, dramatic gap for many years, for decades, in new effective medicines, vaccines, new diagnostics for rapid diagnostic of TB. So we received it, very well-known fact, only 2 new drugs for last 50 years, and ask to the member states, to the industry, to all the partners to increase investments and to accelerate activities towards developing new tools is urgent and really not a luxury and essential part of our TB activities. So if we are serious about ending TB up to 2030, we should remind that there is no successful story without new vaccines. And the progress toward these goals are only 2% per year in decreasing incidence and about 5% in decreasing mortality. And what is needed according to NTB strategy, it's at least 5% in decreasing rate of incidence and 10% in decreasing rate of mortality. A lot of numbers, of course, it sounds maybe a little bit technical information, but it's really very strong message based on the deep analysis of epi situation. And we think that it gives us opportunity to send very strong message and request to the member states at least to pay attention. When I'm talking about the member states, I'm talking now about heads of states, because we saw a huge commitment during the Moscow conference. More than 80 ministers committed very strongly to accelerate activities, but sometimes ministers of health need support on a higher level because TB is multi-sectoral problem, and without providing social support measures, without elimination poverty and malnutrition, it could not be solved. And that's why multi-sectoral engagement of all stakeholders is what is urgently needed. Please stop me now because I'm really very excited about this team. And I think that everything is possible. Of course, situation is really not so optimistic, but we are optimists because it's curable and treatable disease. And we can and we must do our best and to end this story all together jointly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tereza. Now, I would like to move the attention to the member states, which you highlighted at the end of your remarks. Kitty, this morning when I saw you at the UNICEF, WHO and UNICEF site event, you mentioned about family-based approach. And just now, when the minister gave the keynote, she mentioned about the readily regulation in Indonesia about family-based approach as a way to cure TB, to solve the challenge of TB. Can you define to us what is the family-based approach that will work in Indonesia as well as in the Netherlands or perhaps in the Sweden? Can you please elaborate? Thank you.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I had expected many questions, but not this one. I think we all agree that you need to bring services close to families to make it work. And I don't want to compare to my country, but that's what worked in my country. And this morning I mentioned that 100 years ago, my mother had TB as a child. My father had TB. That's not the reason I'm in TB. Because they hid it. Because it was stigmatized also in our country, right? I think if you bring it close to if you bring it into the communities are more likely to be advocates, and that's what we need. If I think of the Indonesian situation, the district they have a lot to say about funding. I have this book here because I don't know it by heart, but in the districts where we work, of course, with the National TB Program under the USAID funding, in the period 2016-2017, with the district planning system, we increased the funding for TB 17% the first year, 57% the second year, makes 83%. This is incredible, especially in a country like Indonesia, with a decentralized health system. You need district ownership, and you need local Puskesmas to take the responsibility to coordinate. Same in those same districts. The engagement of the private providers, of the hospitals, not only private but also public, make mandatory notification not being a legal thing, but something that's really owned by the private sector. In those 16 districts, a notification went up incredibly, 83% in 2 years, 83%. So part of the missing patients is really notification. And not to say that that's the only reason behind a family care. We still need referral hospitals. We still need pediatricians to take care of children with a difficult diagnosis. But I really think that TB is best off if you really have ownership at the lowest level and leadership up there, because you will need the guidelines, you will need the SOPs, you will need the guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Adrian. Two drugs in the last 50 years, and now the expectation is very high for private sector to innovate and to perhaps provide a bit of a silver bullet to break through. Is that possible to catch up?
Go on, Adrian, make our lives easier.
If the more innovation we make, Peter, the more you have to fund. Actually, I feel like a great sense of excitement, and you know, I'm a cardiologist, but 20-something years in this industry, we've seen whole diseases, you know, go away. Particularly, we've seen that in cancer. And I feel that very much that we're on that edge of innovation in TB, particularly drug-resistant TB. But it comes down to, do we want to make that choice? You know, are we prepared to invest in it? And how do we bring much broader innovation to play? So we have 2 new drugs. There are internally in our own company, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Jacques, internally in our own company, we declared a new drug, and we're taking that into the clinic very soon. So that'll be a second drug from the company. But we need 5, 10, 15 drugs, because we're talking about bacteria, and we know that there's no end to this. We can eliminate down to the lowest level, but we have to have a continuing pipeline of innovation. Probably more important is better diagnostics, really. If we think about diagnostics, yes, we have gene-based diagnostics now. Do they get down to the level of people in communities? No, they don't. We need a non-sputum test for TB, and there was some very exciting, discussion around that yesterday at the TB Innovation Summit. A blood signature test. There are fecal tests being proposed, but we need innovation in diagnostics as well. That's absolutely critical. But we don't need to wait for all of that, to be honest. You know, TB was the leading cause of death in today's developed world at the turn of the last century, and we don't see it there. And why is that? It's a commitment to aggressive case finding. It's a commitment to implementation of public health methodologies and the tools we have today, including drugs and diagnostics. But I do feel very excited about the science. And I think that what we need to do, though, is we need to use the science, adopt it quickly, make sure it gets to people. And I want to just make a comment because, you know, to USAID, who I think have shown incredible leadership in this space, with the help of their donation program and the capabilities of the WHO waiver, actually, which was critical, we have access to one of our drugs in over 107 countries today. 107 countries within 5 years. That has to be a record. And I think we need that level of aggressive adoption and uptake of technology. I'd love to talk about the private sector more broadly, but I'm sure we'll have a chance to do that because I'm not just here for J&J, I'm actually the Stop TB Partnership's private sector board member, and I represent a much more diverse group of companies than just the pharmaceutical industry, and I'd like to talk about that at some stage.
Thank you, Adrian. Lucica, the technical guidelines from WHO, the national regulation and ownership of national government and communities, and the innovation and aggressive adoption of innovation and diagnostic cannot get to the people in need without the support of the civil society because of its close proximity to the people. What do you see as an ideal situation in TB handling if we want to end TB by 2030? What is the ideal situation for civil society in this case?
Yeah. So thank you. I'll go directly to the question. I just want to say 2-3 things before that. One is to really thank the Stop TB Partnership Indonesia and the Indonesian government and you, Minister, for putting this event here. And I have a very soft spot and a lot of love for Indonesia for so many reasons, and I'm full of honor to really have so many occasions in meeting and building up together with you, Minister, and the team. But I have to say with you, Mr. Panigoro, and your very nice wife and your team, I want really everyone to understand that there is nothing in it, in a way, for Mr. Panigoro in TB. He could just simply enjoy life in New York or in elsewhere, but he decided to really devote a lot of his time and efforts to help with TB. And I know I'm putting you on spot here, but I really hope you will continue and ramp up this. And I'm looking at you as a champion, not only nationally, but internationally as well, because we need people like you to help us globally to catalyze the corporate sector in doing more in TB. So thank you for this. The second thing is to say that, and I'll go exactly to your point, I'll just make one point, which is we have a big event Wednesday, and we are all here because of this. And you heard it never happened. The biggest risk we have, and I can tell you that I already get scared of it, is that this pressure and this attention that TB had over the last year and a half kind of will disappear, because the agenda will move on. Next year there is a big meeting on universal health coverage, and it's where we want to go, all of us. Nobody wants to leave anyone behind. But usually TB is falling out of the conversations, and it will be big discussions, and TB will be or not, little with small letters there. So if we don't continue the pressure, I'm afraid that it will be very difficult to capitalize this kind of discussions and attention as it was this year. It's a big risk, and we need all of us to think about this. And the next thing to think about, and this is very much will lead me to the point on civil society, is what will happen different. We are now a bit excited. I am very excited because the declaration indeed has very bold targets. Very bold. 40 million people by 2022. When you start thinking who are these 40 million people, children and everything, this is basically everyone that gets TB. We never did this before, ever. It's a huge task. It is feasible, it is. Maybe not 40, but 38 for sure. Anyway, I'm kidding, but it is possible. But this will request an incredible effort. I tell you, it will not be easy. It will request an incredible monitoring to say, and we will not have from the beginning huge achievements, but we need to monitor very well and say, you see, in a year, if you have to detect, let's say, 1 million people, if in the first, that was like roughly whatever, 250 per quarter. If in the first quarter there are not reached 250, then in the second there are just 100,000. Then the 150 that was not reached should be reported to the others. So a very, very straightforward monitoring to look at these figures will be needed. But more than anything will require a very joint partnership, and we are really here, all of us, and thank you, our colleagues from WHO, but especially you, RD Poonam, for the efforts you do in that region to put TB on the agenda. And I think with the help of your team and Swaroop, but you know very well what I'm saying, and without your leadership, I'm fighting with the other regions, as you know very well, in WHO to have the same type of effort. It's not just WHO. As you rightly said, both of you, it's a joint effort. But everyone needs to understand, and private sector needs to step in. And you have here Global Fund. No, none of us alone will not be able to achieve. With the civil society and communities, unless all these efforts will be, what we need them in the ideal scenario, what we need them, where we need the civil society is to be complete part of this effort, you know, from the moment that it is planned to see, okay, what do we mean? Concrete things. What do we mean, like if we want to find every person with TB in the Hotel Roosevelt? Exercise. What do we have to do? Do we knock at every door? Who knocks at every floor? Okay, who divides? What if it's a private sector group in a second floor and we cannot have access? How do we come there? So the civil society and communities need to be at the table from the moment we plan the interventions, should be empowered to help, because really to find everyone, and Minister Nila knows very well, public sector can go as much, private sector can go as much, communities will have access always to everybody. They might not want to really go for it, but so embrace them on the planning, on the implementation, but more than anything on monitoring, and that's a hell. Because they will be very demanding and it's not very comfortable. I am wrestling with some of them all the time. But they should be empowered to really have an opportunity to monitor what's happening and to work with the others and say, hey, it's a joint exercise, so we should be accountable to each other, including Stop TB Global, Stop TB Indonesia, the private sector, KNCV, WHO, Global Fund, but also the country. Are we able to achieve what we want to go there? Because I tell you, the targets we have in the declaration are very ambitious. It will be very difficult to achieve them. But I also say that without us putting some hope in the next 1-2 years that we can move these figures, the world will start questioning, are these people dealing with TB able to do anything? Because for so many years, they tell the same things. I strongly believe we can. I'm looking here at the table. We are all of us here to help you, Minister Nila. Ultimately, you are the government and the lead with your team. You just say, Lucica on the right, Peter Sands on the left, together in front, let's attack tuberculosis, and we will have to behave. And Poonam will hold your hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucica. And last but not least, Peter, we had a bit of a discussion on the table there on how should I pose this next question to you, so you have a bit of a, you know already what I'm going to ask. But still I'm going to ask it anyway, and at the table I say that I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate here. Sustained priority of TB cannot be achieved without a sustained financial mechanism. How do you see this happening? Is it through Global Fund? Is it through domestic resource mobilization, through philanthropy or private sector, or is it through government budget perhaps? Can you please explain to us? Thank you.
Sorry, I always get the fun money question at the end of the evening. And I'm sure you all want me to talk at great length about the details before you get the opportunity to have any coffee. But it is a very good question. As Lucica said, this is a very ambitious declaration that should be secured on Wednesday. And there is a real question about how it's resourced. Fundamentally, there are very few sources of serious money